The fluorescent lights in Jefferson High's main office buzzed faintly as students filed past on their way to lunch. Behind the large oak desk, Mrs. Halbrook, the school secretary, was typing rapidly, her fingers clattering over the keys. The phone rang once, twice, and then she picked it up, speaking in her usual clipped tone. Jefferson High, main office. A minute later, her voice rose slightly as she called down the hallway. Emily Carter, principal's office. Now! Emily froze in the middle of the crowded hallway, her backpack slung carelessly over one shoulder. A few kids turned to watch, whispering as she walked toward the office, her heart pounding even though she tried to keep her face neutral. She had been avoiding this moment all morning, knowing it might come, and now it had. Inside the office, Principal Robert Kane stood near his desk, arms folded across his chest. He was in his late 40s, tall, with neatly combed graying hair, and an expression that rarely shifted from stern disapproval. Close the door, Emily, he said without looking up from the file in his hands. She did, standing silently, gripping the strap of her backpack like a lifeline. You were absent for first and second period yesterday, he began, his voice controlled but edged with irritation. Again. That's the third time this month. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but he cut her off. Save it. Your teachers have already reported it. You're not turning in assignments on time, and now you're skipping class. Do you think this is a game? It's not, she started, but he raised a hand. I don't want excuses. At Jefferson High, we have rules. Attendance is mandatory, and breaking those rules has consequences. He reached for a pink slip on his desk and scribbled his signature at the bottom. You're suspended for 3 days. Take this home to your parents. Emily's throat tightened. Mr. Kane, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, he said, sliding the slip across the desk toward her. You made a choice. Choices have consequences. She stared at the paper for a long moment, then picked it up slowly. For a second, she considered telling him everything. What had really happened yesterday morning? Why she hadn't been in class? But the words stuck in her throat. She could see from the set of his jaw that he wasn't in the mood to listen. Go, he said firmly, already turning his attention back to the paperwork on his desk. Emily walked out without another word. The pink slip crumpled slightly in her fist. As the door closed behind her, she swallowed hard, knowing the truth would come out eventually. She just didn't know that when it did, it would change everything. The morning before had started like any other. Emily had walked out the front door with her backpack, earbuds in, mentally running through the Spanish vocab quiz she was supposed to have in first period. The streets of her neighborhood were quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog. She was halfway to school when she noticed something strange. A man sitting on the curb outside the corner convenience store, his head bowed, one hand gripping his chest. At first, she thought he was just resting, maybe waiting for someone. But as she got closer, she saw his face was pale and clammy, his breathing shallow. Her heart kicked into overdrive. Sir, are you okay? She asked, pulling out her earbuds. His eyes fluttered open for a second, and he whispered, Help, can't breathe, before slumping sideways. Emily's mind flashed through every first aid tip she'd learned in health class. She dropped her backpack, knelt beside him, and pulled out her phone to call 911. Her voice shook as she explained the situation to the dispatcher, giving the street name and describing the man's symptoms. An ambulance is on the way, the calm voice on the line assured her. Is he still conscious? Emily checked quickly. Barely. He's breathing, but it's slow. Following the dispatcher's instructions, she loosened his jacket and checked for any medical alert jewelry. Sure enough, there was a small silver bracelet. Heart condition. That made her work faster. She kept talking to him, even though he could barely respond, telling him help was coming, that he wasn't alone. Minutes felt like hours, until she finally heard the wail of sirens approaching. The paramedics pulled up fast, leaping out with equipment in hand. One of them, a tall woman with sharp eyes, immediately checked his vitals and started preparing oxygen. The other knelt beside Emily. You did the right thing, he told her. You probably saved his life. She felt a rush of relief as they loaded the man into the ambulance. She gave her name and number to one of the paramedics for their report, but when they asked if she needed a ride, she shook her head. By the time the ambulance sped away, Emily realized she was already late for first period, and if she went home to explain, she'd be even later. She made a split-second choice. She walked slowly to school, slipping into the building only after second period had ended. No one had seen her outside, and she told herself she'd explain later if anyone asked. But no one did, until today, when Mr. Kane summoned her to his office. Now, sitting at her desk in third period, the suspension slip heavy in her pocket, Emily felt the bitter weight of staying silent. She had been punished for saving someone's life, and the person who had judged her had no idea what she had done. Emily sat in the cafeteria the next day, pushing a fork through her untouched lunch. Conversations buzzed all around her, but she barely heard them. The suspension slip sat folded in her bag like a piece of evidence she couldn't destroy. Every time she thought about it, her chest tightened, not just from the injustice of it, but from the fact that she hadn't defended herself. She was staring at her tray when a shadow fell over the table. She looked up to see a tall man in a store uniform, the kind with the embroidered name over the chest. "You're Emily Carter, right?" he asked. His voice was low but urgent. She blinked, confused. "Yeah, why?" "I work at the convenience store on Maple," he said. "Yesterday morning, I saw you with Mr. Reynolds, the man who collapsed." Emily's head jerked up. "You saw that?" "Yeah," he nodded, sliding into the seat across from her. "I was inside ringing up a customer, but I saw you kneel down and call 911. You didn't panic. You kept him breathing until the paramedics came. They told me later you might have saved him." Her pulse jumped. You could tell someone? The principal?" Before he could answer, Mrs. Halbrook, the secretary, appeared in the doorway to the lunchroom. "Emily Carter, Principal Kane, wants to see you." "Now!" Emily's stomach twisted. She glanced back at the store clerk. "Please, come with me. Tell him what you saw." A few minutes later, they stood in Kane's office. The principal sat behind his desk, flipping through paperwork, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. "Emily," he said without looking up, "I hope you're here to hand me your signed suspension form." The store clerk stepped forward. "Sir, I'm here because there's been a mistake." That finally made Kane look up. "And you are?" "Tyler Brooks. I work at Maple Convenience. Yesterday morning, I saw Emily save a man's life. She wasn't skipping school for fun. She was on the phone with 911, helping a man with a heart condition until the ambulance arrived." Kane's brow furrowed, the first crack in his stern composure. "Is this true?" he asked Emily. She swallowed hard. "Yes, but I didn't think anyone would believe me. I didn't have proof." Kane sat back in his chair, silent for a moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. "You should have told me," he said at last. "I tried," she replied quietly, "but you didn't want to hear it." The room went still, and for the first time, Emily saw something flicker in the principal's eyes. Not anger, but something closer to doubt. Principal Kane didn't say much after Tyler left his office. He simply told Emily to wait outside and shut the door. She sat in the reception area, staring at the rows of motivational posters on the wall, her foot tapping restlessly against the floor. She wasn't sure if he believed her yet, but the fact that he hadn't immediately dismissed Tyler's account gave her the smallest flicker of hope. Inside, Kane reached for his desk phone and dialed a number from the school's emergency contacts list. "Jefferson High Principal, Robert Kane," he said into the receiver. "I need to confirm an incident involving one of my students, Emily Carter, and a medical emergency on Maple Street yesterday morning." The voice on the other end belonged to a paramedic from the city's EMS department. Kane listened in silence as the man explained how a teenage girl had indeed called 911, stayed with the patient until their arrival, and provided critical information from his medical bracelet. "She was calm," the paramedic said, "knew exactly what to do. I've seen adults freeze in situations like that, but she didn't." Kane's jaw tightened. "And this man? Mr. Reynolds? How is he?" "Stable," came the answer. "His wife said if that girl hadn't acted so fast, he might not have made it to the hospital." Kane thanked the paramedic and hung up, leaning back in his chair. He stared at the suspension slip still lying on his desk, his own handwriting in bold ink across the bottom. The edges of the paper seemed to curl under the weight of his mistake. He prided himself on being fair, on following the rules without bias, but he had been so quick to assume the worst of Emily that he hadn't even given her a chance to speak. He called Mrs. Halbrook into the office. "Send Emily back in," he said. When she returned, she stood in the doorway, wary. "Yes, sir?" Kane gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit down, Emily." His voice was softer than it had been earlier. She sat, clutching the straps of her backpack. "I spoke with the EMS department," Kane began. "They confirmed everything Tyler said. You were helping a man in medical distress yesterday morning." Emily didn't move, didn't even blink. "So, does that mean I'm not suspended?" He looked down at the slip of paper between them, then slowly tore it in half, the sound sharp in the quiet office. "Number. You're not suspended, and I owe you an apology." The words hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar coming from him. "I should have listened when you tried to explain," he continued. "I was too quick to judge." Emily felt the knot in her stomach loosen, but she didn't smile. "I wasn't looking for an apology," she said quietly. "I just didn't want to be punished for doing the right thing." Kane nodded, a faint look of regret in his eyes. "Sometimes, doing the right thing still gets misunderstood. But I'll make sure everyone in this building knows the truth." By the next morning, it was as if the walls of Jefferson High had grown ears. Emily hadn't told anyone about the suspension being overturned, but somehow the story had slipped out, maybe from Tyler, maybe from the principal himself, and was now making its way through the hallways faster than the lunch menu. It started small. As she walked toward her locker, she caught snippets of conversation from two girls leaning against the wall. "She called 911 for some guy," one whispered. "Yeah, and saved him before the ambulance got there," the other replied. Emily kept her head down, trying to ignore it. But by second period, it was impossible to pretend she hadn't been noticed. People she barely spoke to were suddenly giving her nods, quick smiles, or the kind of curious looks usually reserved for celebrity sightings. Even Mrs. Ralston, her history teacher, who rarely smiled at anyone, patted her on the shoulder as she passed. At lunch, Tyler showed up again, this time with a grateful-looking older couple in tow. "Emily," he said, beaming, "this is Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds." Emily froze for a second, then stood quickly as the man she had helped the other morning stepped forward. He looked far better now, color back in his cheeks, eyes alert, but there was still a fragility in the way he moved. "You," he said warmly, "are the reason I'm standing here." Emily felt her throat tighten. "I'm just glad you're okay, sir." Mrs. Reynolds took Emily's hands in hers. "You didn't have to stop. You didn't have to do anything. But you did, and you stayed until help came. We'll never forget that." Students nearby had gone quiet, their trays forgotten, listening to every word. Even across the room, Emily could feel eyes on her. Then, to her surprise, Principal Kane appeared at the cafeteria door. He didn't bark orders or call her to his office. Instead, he approached, stopping just beside the Reynolds couple. "This young woman," Kane said loudly enough for several nearby tables to hear, "showed extraordinary courage and compassion. She put another person's life above her own comfort and safety. That is the kind of character we should all strive for." The cafeteria erupted into quiet applause. Emily wanted to sink through the floor from the attention, but a small part of her felt proud. Not because people were clapping, but because the truth was finally out. She caught Kane's eye for a brief second. He gave her the smallest nod, a silent acknowledgement of both his mistake and her strength. And in that moment, Emily knew the way people saw her, and the way she saw herself, had shifted for good. 2 weeks after the cafeteria applause had faded back into the normal rhythm of school life, Emily found herself walking past the main office on her way to study hall. She was planning to head straight for the library, but a raised voice from inside stopped her. "I said I'm not leaving until I get my son," a man barked. His voice was loud enough to carry through the closed door, raw with frustration. Emily hesitated, then stepped closer. Through the narrow glass panel in the door, she saw a disheveled man in a worn jacket, standing across from Mrs. Halbrook's desk. His face was flushed, his hands gesturing wildly. Mrs. Halbrook looked tense, her fingers hovering over the phone. Principal Kane appeared from his office, his expression tight. "Sir, please calm down. We can't release your son to you without proper identification. Those are the rules." The man slammed his palm on the counter. "My wallet was stolen this morning. I'm telling you, my kid needs me now. He's in trouble." The standoff froze there. Kane, firm but guarded, the man, desperate but without proof. Emily didn't know why her feet carried her inside, but she pushed open the door before she could second-guess herself. "Mr. Kane," she said quietly. "I know him." Both men turned to her. Kane's eyes narrowed. "Emily, this isn't your concern." She stepped forward anyway. "He's telling the truth. That's Mr. Dawson. He works at the community center near my street. He helps run the after-school program for kids who don't have anywhere to go. I've seen him there plenty of times." Mr. Dawson looked at her with a mix of relief and surprise. You're the girl from Maple Street, aren't you? The one from the news?" Kane's head turned slightly at that. "From the news?" Mr. Dawson nodded. "The one who saved that man's life. I remember your face. If she says she knows me, she knows me." There was a pause, the kind that feels heavy with decision. Kane studied Emily for a long moment, then reached for the phone on Mrs. Halbrook's desk. Instead of dialing the police, he called down to the guidance counselor's office to have Mr. Dawson's son brought up. Minutes later, a nervous-looking boy appeared, his backpack hanging off one shoulder. The moment he saw his father, his eyes lit up. Mr. Dawson crouched, pulled him into a hug, and murmured something Emily couldn't hear. Kane watched all of it in silence. When the Dawsons left together, he turned to Emily. "You put your name on the line for him." She met his gaze. "Sometimes rules are important. And sometimes you have to look at the person in front of you and trust what you see." For a second, Kane said nothing. Then, in a rare gesture, he gave her a faint smile. "Maybe I'm still learning that lesson from you." Emily walked out of the office with a quiet sense of déjà vu, another moment where doing the right thing had meant stepping forward, even when it wasn't easy. And just like before, she could tell the principal's opinion of her had shifted again, in a way that felt permanent. It was a gray Thursday morning when the announcement came over the intercom. "All students, please report to the auditorium for a special assembly." The tone in the secretary's voice made it sound official, maybe even urgent. Emily joined the steady stream of students filing down the hall, still wondering what it was about. The auditorium buzzed with chatter until Principal Kane stepped onto the stage. The murmurs quieted almost instantly. He stood at the podium in his navy suit, holding a sheet of paper in one hand, his other resting lightly on the edge of the lectern. "This morning," he began, "I want to talk about character. Not grades, not attendance, not test scores, but the kind of decisions you make when no one's watching, when there's no guarantee of recognition." His eyes swept over the crowd before settling on a point near the middle. Emily had the uneasy feeling he was looking right at her. "A few weeks ago," he continued, "one of our students made such a decision. She skipped class. By the rules, that's an infraction. But what I didn't know then, and what I have since learned, is that she wasn't wandering the streets or hiding from her responsibilities. She was kneeling on the sidewalk beside a stranger who was seconds away from losing his life. She called for help. She stayed with him until the ambulance arrived. She made sure he wasn't alone." Emily's cheeks burned as the whispering began, little ripples of recognition moving through the audience. Kane raised a hand for silence. "Her actions not only saved a man's life, but they reminded me, and should remind all of us, that rules matter, yes, but so does understanding the human being in front of you." He gestured toward the side of the stage. "Emily Carter, please join me." Emily's stomach flipped. For a moment, she considered sinking into her seat, but the nudges from her friends propelled her forward. She climbed the steps, her legs feeling oddly heavy, and stood beside Kane at the podium. "This," Kane said, turning to her with a rare, genuine smile, "is a student who has shown courage, empathy, and integrity. For that, we want to recognize her publicly." He reached into an envelope and pulled out a certificate embossed with the school crest. "Jefferson High Commendation for Exemplary Citizenship." As he handed it to her, the entire auditorium erupted in applause. It wasn't the polite, scattered clapping of obligation. It was warm, sustained, and loud enough to echo off the walls. Emily felt the heat rise to her face, but this time, she didn't try to hide. She let herself meet the eyes of her classmates, her teachers, even strangers in the back rows. and she saw nothing but respect. When the applause finally faded, Kane leaned in slightly so only she could hear. "I meant what I said before. I'm still learning from you." Emily nodded, clutching the certificate, feeling the strange mix of pride and humility settle over her. For the first time since the day in his office, she knew he saw her for who she really was. Not as a troublemaker, but as someone who could be trusted to do what was right. And as she stepped down from the stage, the thought crossed her mind that maybe, just maybe, she'd remember this moment for the rest of her life.